Who likes me very much. I am very popular. I am very powerful. I am the one who has got the money. I have got a very good brain. Why do you ask me about Hitler?
Despite his famously pleasant demeanor that was always accompanied by a smile, a military dictator and one of the most feared African leaders to ever exist ruled Uganda. Rumors spread that he kept human heads in his refrigerator. He confessed to cannibalism on several occasions. "I have eaten human meat," he said in 1976. "It is very salty, even more salty than leopard meat." The only president to ever hold so many titles and honors, including President for Life, Field Marshal, Al-Haji Dr. Idi Amin Dada, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the seas, and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa in general and Uganda in particular, among others. Those were too many accolades for a single individual, and you may be wondering how great he was, right? Idi Amin Dada ruled Uganda for 8 years from 1971 to 1979 with an iron fist and only did what he saw pleased regardless of whether it was ethical or not. In 1971, Idi Amin led a military coup that overthrew the then President Milton Obote, a coup that was widely celebrated but very few people were prepared for the bloody and oppressive decade that would follow Obote's government overthrow and assumption of Idi Amin's dictatorial leadership. As you can now see, even the excellency title of the presidency was all but through a coup. During his rule, Amin was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 300,000, some estimates put the number as high as 500,000, people out of a total population of 12 million and the outright rejection of over 50,000 Asians and 500 Israelis. A good example of this is when Idi Amin pretended, on one occasion, to throw a party for street beggars and people with disabilities. After allegedly providing them with food and entertainment, the former dictator is said to have thrown well over 4,000 crippled individuals and beggars into the crocodile-infested waters of Lake Victoria's headwaters. Ironically, people in Uganda still hold a lot of respect for Amin, even though he oversaw a lot of terrible things like human rights abuses and mass murder while he was in power. His ability to portray himself as a liberator, a man of the people who wiped out his country's imperialist history, made many Ugandans view him as more of their savior than the dictator he was. Welcome to today's video as we look at the reign of a murderous dictator, the very definition of evil, a man-eater, a maniac, a buffoon, a guy with the heart of the devil, and a monster who killed his people so easily and effortlessly like the blinking of an eye. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and like this video. To comprehensively understand Amin's psychic leadership and behavior, we cannot just look at the period of his leadership alone but rather go back to the very beginning which shaped one of the world's most brutal dictators not only in his time but in history. The young Dada Idi Amin. Idi Amin Dada Ami was born in northwest Uganda, close to the country's borders with Congo and Sudan. His exact birth year is unknown, but experts estimate it to be 1925. Well, at this time in Africa, birth records were not practiced and it is quite common to find a good number of people born during the early 1900s who genuinely don't know their exact date of birth, month, and less commonly, their year of birth. I believe up to there we are on the same page. Right? Amin's father was a farmer from the Kakwa tribe, who had migrated to Uganda from the Congo and Sudan. His mother was of Lugbara descent. Ugandans generally refer to both groups as Nubian, and Amin would always side with the Nubian people later when he took power. He preferred them in government appointments and nepotism is typical of any dictator. The troubling behavior of Idi Amin started right when he was young. His parents got a divorce, and his mother, together with his siblings, had to relocate to the city. It was while in the city that Amin enrolled in a Muslim elementary school up to 4th grade and would later drop out. He never went back to school. So here we have an illiterate president who has seen his father violently deal with his mother and siblings, and we expect everything to be as just fine. Like such issues at an early age are not enough, Amin joins the army in 1946 under the British colonial powers and sees how the natives are mistreated by the British colonizers. Despite the hell he has to go through, he grows and learns a lot. All through he is shaped into an obedient soldier through intimidation and cowering despite his towering stature. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, fluency in the local Kiswahili language, and lack of education, which made him believe that he can only be under control since he is not educated. Nevertheless, the young man exerted himself to acquire military skills offered by the British who had ruled Uganda since 1894. Military career. After enlisting in the military in 1946 and portraying obedience and being able to speak Swahili fluently and gaining basic military skills, Amin was promoted to corporal in 1949, from his previous rank as a private. For him, this was the first of many pivotal moves that would propel him upward in the ranks of authority. Although Amin would later use anti-imperialist rhetoric to win support, the early 1950s were not a time when you could easily speak openly against colonizers' imperialism. However, in this case, Amin would collaborate with the colonizers fighting alongside the British to defeat the Mau Mau African independence fighters in Kenya and the Somalian insurgents so that the British could maintain control of their protectorates across Africa. Almost immediately, word of his viciousness as a soldier spread, and he was promoted rapidly. In 1957, he was promoted to sergeant major and given command of his squad. A further 2 years passed before Amin was promoted to Effendi, the highest rank attainable by a native-born Ugandan in the armed forces. In 1962, Amin was promoted to the highest military position ever held by an African. I will take you back a little. With adequate skills, power among his fellow Ugandans, and his giant size, Amin is now a power to reckon with. He is super athletic and wins many outdoor competitions, receiving numerous prizes from the British. The young private blew everyone away in the pool. He loved swimming, on the rugby field, and in the ring. Amin won the light heavyweight title in Uganda for the first time as an amateur in 1951 and defended it for the next 9 years without losing a single fight. This made him not only famous among his peers but almost another colonist, an African colonizer. He is now vicious, unaccommodating, and brutal. Power is already in his head. He is one of the highest-ranked African by the British in Uganda. He is just second after Milton Obote, who would later become the country's prime minister in 1962 independence. Idi Amin and Milton Obote. Idi Amin Dada's military might grew, but he ran into trouble for his violent policies almost immediately. In 1962, it was reported that Amin and his army had committed terrible crimes after an initial simple task of finding cattle rustlers in the Kenya-Uganda border turned into brutal murdering of those involved. Upon examination of the remains, British authorities in Nairobi determined that the victims had been beaten and tortured to death. One or more of them may have been buried while still alive. Since Amin was one of only 2 senior African commanders and Uganda was close to winning independence from Britain on October 9, 1962, Obote and British authorities decided not to file charges against him. On the contrary, Obote promoted him and sent him to the United Kingdom for further military training. The expansion of the Ugandan army and other smuggling operations formed the basis of a successful partnership between Amin and Prime Minister Obote in 1964. They agreed to work hand in hand as the new and first official leaders of Uganda after the country's independence. Obote simply overlooked Amin's atrocities and awarded him instead of punishing him. The other leaders of Uganda were understandably concerned about Obote's abuse of power. King Matusa II of Uganda, a pre-colonial kingdom in Uganda, specifically called for a thorough investigation into the Prime Minister's activities. Obote then established his own investigative body and had them produce results largely in his favor. Upon Idi Amin's return from military school in Britain, Obote promoted him to major in 1963 and colonel the following year. As a colonel, Amin stole $350,000 worth of gold and ivory that was supposed to be used to arm the Congolese guerrilla army. The scandal was brought to Obote's government by 5 prime ministers, but instead of arresting Amin, his soldiers promptly arrested them. Obote suspended the constitution and declared himself president, and after 2 days, Amin took control of the Ugandan military and police. Obote, then co-ruler with Uganda King Nyatesa II, sent tanks to storm the palace a few months later. After abdicating, the king left government and military operations in the hands of Obote and Amin, respectively. As Obote prepared to leave for a conference in Singapore on January 25, 1971, Amin staged a military coup to seize power. Unfortunately for Obote, the person he had helped ended up sending him into exile.
Until the terrible Amin regime ended, he would not return. Idi Amin, the people's man.
Amin's rise to power was widely supported in Uganda.
They viewed him differently than Obote.
He was approachable and wasn't merely a military leader, but a charismatic man of the people.
There was street dancing as people celebrated.
When he had the chance, he would enthusiastically dance the traditional dances with the commoners, shake their hands, and pose for photographs. His friendly nature made Ugandans believe that he was a president who cared for them.
He allowed the body of King Mutesa to be flown and buried in the country. Remember him being overthrown by Obote and running for his life in exile? Amin also granted amnesty to political prisoners and completely abolished Obote's secret police. At first, Idi Amin was everything a new Ugandans could ask for a president, and they loved him. Amin's success may have been attributed, in part, to his many marriages to women from different Ugandan ethnic groups.
This move was both strategic and political, as Ugandans felt well represented at the presidential level, even though the 6 legal wives had no say at all apart from siring him many children and raising them.
To many Ugandans, Idi Amin was the solution to doing away with any form of foreign influence, especially from British, who had kept them under colonization for over 7 decades. His ability to portray himself as a liberator, a man of the people who wiped out his country's imperialist history, made many Ugandans view him as more of their savior than the dictator he was. Idi Amin was loved for taking actions against Indians who were discriminative of native Ugandans, more on his later in the video. Gender historian Alicia Decker wrote that the deeply embedded culture of militarism in Uganda is undoubtedly Amin's most enduring legacy. His reputation in Uganda has been viewed over the decades following his rule in more complex ways than in the international community.
Some Ugandans have praised him as a patriot and supported his decision to expel Asians from the country.
At the time of his death, he was particularly well regarded in northwestern Uganda.
One of Amin's sons, Jafar Remo, criticized the negative public perception of his father and called for a commission to investigate the veracity of the abuses committed under his rule. Idi Amin, the brutal dictator.
The war of Hitler, it was a different war than the war today.
Behind the public-pleasing actions he portrayed to many Ugandans, Idi Amin Dada was busy organizing his own death squads, entrusted with eliminating soldiers suspected of being loyal to Obote. He ruled as a military dictator and is considered one of the most brutal despots in modern world history. A total of 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers from the Akoli, Langi, and other tribes were brutally murdered by these squads in their barracks. These tribes were perceived as being faithful to the overthrown leader Milton Obote. To others, it swiftly became clear that Amin's man-of-the-people persona was nothing more than a mask to hide his actual tendencies. He was harsh and vindictive, and used his military power to further his own goals. In 1972, he sought aid from Israel financially and militarily to fight Tanzania, but Israel turned down his request. Amin approached Libya's dictator Muammar Gaddafi after Israel denied his request and offered to give him financial assistance. Demonstrating once again his inability to handle political affairs diplomatically, Amin decided to revenge on Israelis living in Uganda for the failure of their government to support him. He ordered well over 500 Israelis to pack and leave his country in the next 90 days. Ugandan Asians were also caught up in his wrath. These Ugandan Asians were entrepreneurial, talented, and hard-working people, competent in business, and they created the backbone of the economy, hence the jealousy by most locals. On August 4, 1972, Amin ordered the expulsion of 50,000 British passport holders of Indian origin from the nation by giving them 90 days to leave Uganda or else be captured and taken to concentration camps owned by his army. Idi Amin arbitrarily repatriated them and dished out their businesses to people from his ethnic background, transferring their land and enterprises to his allies, who immediately ran them into the ground via incompetence and mismanagement. But why British passport holding Asians? According to locals who were youths in the 70s, the Indians at the time had turned and taken the oppressive nature of former British colonists. It all started during Milton Obote's presidency. Apparently, prior to independence, the governments of the soon-to-be independent East African nations anticipated that there would be a shortage of skilled manpower to fill positions in the medical fields, public works, banking etc. So all the governments chose to give scholarships to Indian decent students to go study the relevant courses in UK and the US. This was because this particular group of citizens had the minimum qualifications to enter universities versus the rest who were mostly getting started in the path of education.
Uganda sent slightly above 400 students for studies.
However, upon completion, they returned to the country and refused to be deployed by the government to the different parts of the country where their expertise was needed and instead chose to remain in the capital, Kampala, and work in the various family businesses that dominated the city economy, oftentimes using the new knowledge they had acquired. Now prior to independence, these individuals had British citizenship and upon independence, they acquired dual citizenship. So when the government tried to press down them to honor the terms of the scholarship, they claimed British citizenship, therefore the government had no grounds to deploy them. As a result, these governments asked the British to take their citizens, and this occurred during the reign of Dr. Apollo Milton Obote, the executive prime minister at the time. Dr. Obote was in unison with the governments of Kenya and Tanzania on this push to drive the now British citizens out, and the British government sent representatives to discuss the situation with the three governments. However, the arrival of Amin put all this in a new picture. Being the army commander in Obote's government, he was aware of this issue, and as an army man, he was not one for diplomacy and always preferred immediate action. He expedited the expulsion process and used people's common experiences with Indian descended citizens to sway public support to his side.
Some of these experiences.
The Indians were extremely discriminative economically, professionally and socially. They shut out native Ugandans from joining businesses that they dominated, limited interactions with them professionally, and had Indians-only clubs in Kampala. They considered natives beneath some and had offensive names that they called their native workers. This could be a legacy of the caste system in India, which created a need to subjugate a group of people. What made this worse was that most of the Indians were either descended from parents belonging to lower castes or were from lower castes themselves, and previous victims tend to make the worst bullies. Indians dictated the trend of the economy, and locally, as the majority shop owners, they dictated the price of items on a given day. So on Monday bread would be say $1 and the next day $3. If one moved around, that price change would be consistent with the exception of a few African-owned or Pakistani-owned shops.
Indians never assimilated into the local society and also didn't allow anyone to assimilate into theirs.
If one married an African, one was immediately expelled from the Indian community. This still happens today. So this always ensured that they always seemed like foreigners, though a number of them were born here. These are the major reasons, and others can fall into one of these. The fourth reason is one that till this day, few natives have any sympathy for the Indians. Sympathy is reserved for Pakistanis since they actually were assimilating into local society, mainly because being majority Muslim, they freely interacted with the Muslim segment of the native population and thus blended in better. However, because of similar physical attributes, there was no way to distinguish them during the expulsion period, and they had to leave as well for safety.
So Amin expelled Indians on grounds that Uganda was for people who were truly Ugandans and not for foreigners who were here to exploit the country and exclude the citizens from the benefits of the country's independence and economic growth.
The expulsions caused a severe economic downturn in Uganda, as the Asian population there included many prosperous plantation and business owners, and Israel had undertaken several large building projects.
The Ugandan dictator's instability, repression, and corruption worsened significantly by the mid-1970s.
He traveled with a rotating cast of friends, changed his route and mode of transportation frequently, and slept wherever he could find a bed. It is believed that apart from his 6 wives, the man had well over 30 mistresses and well over 42 children. In one of the interviews conducted with one of his daughters, she was at task to state exactly how many siblings she had, and in another interview with his third-born son called Jaffer, he stated that his father had 60 children, but those officially recognized were 40. Anyways, the number sits well for such a dictator, considering the number of wives and mistresses she had and the fact that he hated most of the West technology, meaning he could not do family planning. Also, the one African tradition at the time was that the more children one had, the more respect he commanded. You can check on one of our videos on most weird traditions that were practiced in Africa here. Despite his not being well educated, Amin had a sort of natural intelligence. With his arrogant and violent nature, he knew for a fact that he had accumulated way too many enemies. As a result, he had come up with a way of retaining his soldiers and allies' loyalty. They were among the best living Ugandans at the time.
Amin lavished them with electronic gadgets, booze, promotions, and fast cars. Additionally, he granted his followers control of firms that had been held by Uganda's Asian minority. By this point, Amin was using the majority of national funds for the armed forces and his expenses, a classic tenet of 20th-century military dictatorships. More importantly, Amin persisted in ordering an increasing number of his fellow countrymen that were critical of his governance to be killed. Tens of thousands of Ugandans were still violently murdered for racial, political, and economic reasons. His murderous techniques grew more brutal. Rumors spread that he kept human heads in his refrigerator. He confessed to cannibalism on several occasions. "I have eaten human meat," he said in 1976. "It is very salty, even more salty than leopard meat." Some people thought that Amin's brutality was due to the heady effects of absolute power. Some said his policies were responsible for the spread of syphilis in its advanced stages. In his early military days, he was charged with failing to treat an STD, and in the mid-1970s an Israeli doctor who had served in Uganda told a Tel Aviv newspaper, "It's no secret that Amin is suffering from the advanced stages of syphilis, which has caused brain damage." Despite being a brutal dictator, Amin was elected chairman of the Organization of African Unity in 1975. As punishment for his human rights abuses, his superiors promoted him to field marshal, and in 1977, African nations voted against a United Nations resolution that would have held him accountable. The Entebbe airport hijack. Idi Amin was high-headed and unconcerned about the consequences of his actions. After all, he considered himself the conqueror of the universe, one above human laws, the most powerful of all. In 1976, when Palestinian militants hijacked an Air France flight from Tel Aviv to Paris, Amin collaborated with the leftist Palestinians and aided them in the hijack, a decision that would put him in an awkward position with Israel and France. Don't forget that he had already created enmity with Britain after repatriating British Asians from the country, as well as Israelis. An outspoken Israel hater, he sanctioned the terrorists landing at Uganda's Entebbe airport and supplied them with troops and supplies while they held 246 passengers and 12 crew members hostage. But Israel didn't give up and on the night of July 3 sent elite commandos to Entebbe airport to stage a daring rescue operation. 101 of 105 hostages were saved in what is widely regarded as one of the most daring and successful rescue operations in human history. One Israeli soldier was killed, but all 7 hijackers and 20 Ugandan soldiers were eliminated. After a turn of events, Amin had one of the hostages, a 74-year-old British-Israeli woman, executed because she had fallen ill during the hostage situation and was being treated in an Uganda hospital. According to British records made public in 2017, Dora Block was allegedly shot before being dragged from her hospital bed and placed into the trunk of a government vehicle. 19 miles distant, on a sugar field, a white woman's body was discovered, but the fire and decay had left the body too disfigured for identification. Amin's image abroad was severely damaged by his hasty act of revenge, which demonstrated his increasingly erratic behavior. With each passing day, it's clear that Amin's supporters were dwindling. Throughout the late 1970s, Amin's destructive actions only grew in frequency and severity. A number of prominent Ugandans, including Archbishop Janani Luwum and Interior Minister Charles Obethofumbai, were executed at his order in 1977 for associating with the exiled former President Milton Obote. Amin did not care but went ahead increasing the number of his enemies. Later in this video, you will realize how this contributed to his rapid downfall. After the Entebbe incident, the British cut off all diplomatic ties with Uganda. It was after this incident that Amin went ahead and boastfully declared himself the conqueror of the British Empire. But even his position didn't protect him from the worsening economy. The principal product from Uganda, coffee, saw a sharp decline in price in the 1970s.
The United States, which bought 1/3 of Uganda's coffee exports, cut off all trade with the country in 1978.
With a worsening economy and widespread resistance to his reign, Amin's grasp on power was proving shaky. A large number of Ugandans had already left for the United Kingdom and other African countries, and many of his soldiers had mutinied and fled to Tanzania. Amin used the absolute last resort he had to stay in power. In October of 1978, he ordered an invasion of Tanzania because he believed the country was responsible for inciting violence in Uganda. He had now taken the war from world powers, after conquering the British Empire, and was now attacking his East African neighbor. In his conscience, he was soon to add another title to his many, the conqueror of the former British Protectorate, East Africa. However, Tanzanian forces not only repelled the assault but also invaded Uganda, much to the surprise of the despot. On April 11, 1979, Tanzanian and exiled Ugandan soldiers seized Kampala, the Ugandan capital, and overthrew the Amin regime. Life after exile. Amin initially fled to Libya with his 4 wives and more than 30 children, where he had connections thanks to Muammar Gaddafi. His ally the Libyan dictator is believed to have assisted him relocate to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. He suffered from multiple organ failure and had been on life support for some years when his family decided to turn off his life support and died in 2003. The following year, in 2006, Forrest Whitaker won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his portrayal of Amin in the film The Last Monarch of Scotland, so titled because Amin claimed to be Scotland's uncrowned king.